Wow, welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's good to see y'all. I know I haven't uploaded regular channel videos in a while, and there's a good reason for that. So let's get into it. So much of the content on this channel is advocacy, education, awareness, and action driven. And that is solely because, there is a mission that I have, but there's a mission that kind of needs to be fulfilled in the area of advocating and bringing awareness to people with disabilities, albinism, medical conditions, and invisible and chronic conditions. So the premise of this channel is embedded on the foundation of what I do in terms of boots on the ground in my community. And so here in North Carolina is where I reside. And as an advocate in my community, I advocate in the Piedmont, Central North Carolina, as well as all over the state. I collaborate with different organizations like Disability Inclusion North Carolina, the Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, as well as different parent locations in terms of agencies that equip parents and families of children with disabilities, in addition to working with national and global organizations like NOAA and Born to White Ottawa and things of that nature. So, as an advocate, offline is about 70 to really 90% of what I do on a regular basis. So, since the last channel video that I've uploaded, I had the privilege of speaking in person at several events. The first of the summer that I attended was the Family Leadership Conference, hosted, sponsored, and curated by the Children's the Exceptional the Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, or ECAC for short. This was held in Raleigh, North Carolina, on the campus of North Carolina State University. So while there, I got the opportunity to speak in two capacities. One, as a sole speaker, as a part of a presentation where I talked about the community implications of mental health on students and individuals who navigate disability. Mental health is not only an emerging topic and field in a mainstream societal aspect, but it's also gaining more momentum in the area of disability. And for good reason. Studies show that people with disabilities are 4 to 5 times more likely to experience anxiety and depression. Then you throw in chronic conditions and illnesses in the mix, that is multiplied exponentially. So for this to be an emerging topic gaining momentum in our community, that's a great thing, especially when we consider the community factors like transportation, finances, insurance, medical costs, all of these things that nobody really talks about or thinks about in association with the mental health of those who navigate disability. So, and then day 2 of that conference, I was a part of a panel where I essentially got to kind of highlight and share my story of navigating the education system with disabilities. And, being able to communicate that to a room full of, local government officials, parents, educators, education professionals like the Department of Public Instruction professionals. It was a cool experience because anytime I get to engage with a new audience as a speaker and a communicator, it provides me with knowledge of people and different professions that they have, different concerns, and being able to be in a room full of individuals um, in this capacity, particularly parents. I get to discern and learn from them as an advocate on what it means to advocate alongside their children, what it means in terms of having legitimate concerns when IEPs are not dealt with appropriately, or when there's a lack of access due to being in more rural living situation in terms of our state. So that was a great experience for me. And it also, I was just honored the whole time to be a part of it as a young adult in these spaces. Oftentimes, young adults with disabilities are missing from the equation and from the rooms where it happens. But I was extremely thankful just to be what I like to call a doorstop. So I don't speak on behalf of these communities. I speak as someone a part of these communities, but also I speak with the wherewithal that I am a doorstop, which kind of opens the door enough for other people to have opportunities as well. Because ultimately, that's what it's all about, amplifying the voices of other individuals so that we can humanize people with disabilities, chronic conditions, medical conditions, and albinism. So the next in-person speaking engagement that I had was with the East Carolina University Inclusion Summit. It was their 6th annual, and this was also kind of planned and curated as well by ECAC. And while there, I got to meet in person some of the fellow members of the youth advisory team that I'm a part of with this organization. And being able to meet them in person, we meet every other Tuesday on a regular basis via Zoom. And so to meet these individuals in person, to be able to say, wow, like we get to hang out, communicate, talk about these things together, it was another level of, I think, solidifying the community that we have kind of built on Zoom. And so I got to speak in 2 capacities on the first day of the conference. And one of the things that I spoke about alongside my fellow youth advisory teams on both panels, the first session we talked about what inclusion means. Many times we think of gender, we think of race, but in many cases, more often than not, people with disabilities are excluded from the conversation of inclusion. And I think, honestly, and this is what I said in this particular session, is a more robust definition of inclusion does not exist if people with disabilities are not included. And that also involves having intergenerational dynamics. So whether it be young people with disabilities, older people with disabilities, older people in general, younger people in general, adults in general. So there needs to be intergenerational components because, as we're seeing in society, there continues to be a gap in generations in understanding and building camaraderie and a sense of community as different generations age and emerge. So I spoke about that alongside my fellow panelists. Who did amazing. And they're all great self advocates in their own right and community advocates in their own right. Then the next session we spoke about, or we kind of led a presentation, if you will, on student-led IEPs. And so student-led IEPs are, the state here in North Carolina, they're mandated to at least extend the offer or invitation of joining the IEP by the time you really hit that 8th grade freshman year of high school age. But student-led IEPs go beyond that. They bring the student in and allow them to have a seat at the table as early as possible so they can understand why they're receiving the accommodations they're receiving, so they can communicate what's working and what's not, so they can voice their opinion. And through that, hopefully happening as early as possible, they begin to build the skills for what we call big T transition, which is that gap between graduating high school and going to college or whatever that individual decides to do. Because unfortunately, we're seeing just a need to prepare students much earlier, and that need is not being fulfilled as much as we would like. So we're currently trying to equip students with disabilities as soon as possible because it is so crucial to adulthood, young adulthood, and pretty much, the rest of your lifespan. So I had the pleasure of speaking about what exactly it means to have a student involved in the IEP. And I gave some of my experiences as a student who was involved in the IEP process and how that really kind of laid the foundation for me when I got to college and eventually got a job, in terms of, understanding my accommodation letter, having the confidence to speak up, even though, there were times where, self-advocating does get tiresome. But that doesn't make it any less necessary. So being involved in that IEP process in high school really kind of laid that foundation. So I spoke about that. And then it ended, we went back home. It was a great experience being at East Carolina University. And then another in-person event that I had. Um, let me just go ahead and say thank you to Noah, Karen Bly, Lori Aubrey, Dante Mickens, the whole Noah staff and team for bringing me out to Noah Conference 2022, which was held in Orlando, Florida. Um, and they just, it was a wonderful experience. If you don't know what NOAA is, it stands for the National Organization for Albinism and Hypopigmentation. And literally, it was the first time in my life I had been surrounded by so many other individuals who had albinism. To give you an idea how rare that is, I don't think I've had, wherewithal, knowledge, or relationship with anyone with albinism, you know, in that capacity ever. I have a few friends who have it now by way of, a camp that I attended. I noticed a few individuals in public, but to be surrounded and a part of a community where I was essentially in the majority of people, who had no pigmentation, who were all visually impaired. I mean, we were all looking at our phones like this, and there was no explanation needed. We all needed 100 to 120 SPF sunscreen with zinc oxide. Like it was another experience. And so while there, I had the opportunity to speak in four capacities. So I did four speaking engagements, so to speak. So I facilitated the BIPOC panel, BIPOC meaning Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And so while there, I facilitated and moderated. So there was a panel of 3 individuals, and I had curated questions just to, aid and assisting our panelists. And I would ask the question, each member would answer it, and then I would kind of answer and provide insight as well. And it went really well from the standpoint that we got audience engagement, and that's pretty much my marker of how well things go. If I got people to interact, because ultimately we tend to retain the experiences and the information and the knowledge that we interact with, even if we're talking like academia or just life in general. So I got to meet several parents of children and young adults and teens of albinism who were also African American. And for me, being a Black woman with albinism, it gave me hope. I did not have parents who had the knowledge of albinism who went to the nth degree to advocate alongside me. So thankfully, I had other family members who stepped in and did that. But I did not have that from my mother and father. And so to see a generation of young people with albinism who are Black, who have parents who are going up to bat for them, willing to ask the hard questions, do the hard things, it gave me hope that there's a generation of young kids with albinisms who don't have to navigate some of the pitfalls that myself and other people, before me had to navigate. And so after that, it transitioned to the next session that I kind of facilitated, which was the BIPOC support forum, which we transitioned to another room. And I kind of gave the instruction of, okay, so, I know that there's not a lot of us having these types of discussions, or we don't have a lot of community in terms of being Black individuals with albinism who know of other Black families with children of albinism. So it was a great mix. You had people with albinism and then parents of children with kids with albinism. And it became this beautiful moment where those of us with albinism could talk to parents of their children who have children with albinism and share like what it's like for us, some of the things we navigated, how from a parent perspective, having that home, that sense of home, belonging, and openness and communication can really go a long way in terms of the mental health of their children with albinism. And it was such a deep, poignant, and cathartic experience as each person, from parent to person with albinism, shared their experiences. And then it ended in us being in this like big circle, kind of chatting it up and things of that nature. And so I was extremely like blessed to have been in that room and watched that unfold. And then the next session that I spoke at, Noah curated this part of the conference called NOAA Talks, which is essentially their version of a TED Talk, but housed within the confines of this conference. And so I spoke there about kind of my journey, in synopsis, so to speak, with albinism. So from how I went from not knowing a thing and developing self-loathing tendencies and self-hatred of my lack of pigmentation, to trying to become invisible, to navigating therapy and really, the amalgamation of faith, therapy, and creativity, kind of helping me navigate the journey of becoming better and not bitter, so to speak. um, and how those remnants of creativity that I had exhibited from elementary school on are the same things that I've been blessed to incorporate into what I do now as a philanthropreneur, advocate, and whatnot. So it was an awesome experience. And after that, I ended up meeting some amazing parents and individuals, and being able to have that space and time to share my story. It was very, um, again, it was a blessing. Like, I recognize in many cases, very rarely do we as people with disabilities, people who have albinism, medical conditions, chronic illnesses, very rarely are we allowed a platform to share our stories publicly, but also to share them publicly and have the ability or the opportunity to communicate the real, authentic, raw aspects of that life experience. So I don't take it lightly, ever. So it was just an honor to participate that. And then the final speaking engagement that I had, that day, was I got to work with, some individuals from Canada. They put together this session called All About Eyes. And so each, there were like about 8 or 9 tables, and each table had a station talking about different aspects of the eye regarding albinism. So my session, or the table that I got to kind of help facilitate with another gentleman, who is older with albinism, was about sunglasses. Because I don't know whether you know it or not, but sunglasses are often overlooked, but they are a key feature in the repertoire of somebody who lives with albinism, from a visual perspective, from a photophobia perspective. So having a good set, or a nice, kit, so to speak, of sunglasses is important. Talks about the different types of sunglasses, so polarized lenses, mirrored lenses, gradient tinted, the different types of color tinted lenses that are available, why it's important in terms of the visible light spectrum that we see, and how that ultraviolet spectrum, the light that we're not able to necessarily perceive as well, really does hinge on our ability to see outdoors and, protect our skin well. So it was a great experience. I got to meet so many amazing individuals, from, representatives from Under the Same Sun, the United Nations, to, parents and individuals with albinism who've written books. And I will, be dropping a couple videos on those pretty soon. But it was an amazing experience. It was also my first time flying, and I flew by myself, with the help of, American Airlines special assistants. So there'll be a video coming on that later. It was all around a great experience. And, I recognize in hindsight that I don't talk about, what I do in terms of community outreach and advocacy a lot on this channel. So I thought it would be cool to kind of let you guys into what my summer has been like. I continue to do a bunch of virtual events, speaking with Duke University, North Carolina Prevention Conference, and each opportunity is a blessing and a gift, and I don't take it lightly. And I'm excited because more organizations are becoming aware that disability accommodation and awareness is a legitimate and growing need. Um, so yeah, thank you guys for your time. Like, share, comment, subscribe, all those things. Drop a comment if you would. And I will catch you guys in the next video.